As they get dangerously close to 7%, everyone's talking about mortgage rates. Let's discuss that and more in this week's segment of Market Watch. Hi everyone, it's Joshua Barks here, associate broker with Keller Williams Realty Boise and team lead of the Barks & Co. real estate team. Thank you for being here and taking a look at the market in Boise. Let's talk about inventory first. Inventory is staying pretty flat. We have just under 1,600 available homes right now, 10 more than we had last week with 1,589 available homes. And then we had 177 new listings come to market this week, compared to the 172 last week. So pretty much flat across the board. Inventories about the same. Number of pending sales, pendings are down slightly. No surprise with the rising interest rates. We have 524 homes pending under contract right now, down from last week's 566 pending overall. And we only had 121 homes go under contract compared to 140 the week prior. Now, with demand, with rising interest rates, we're likely going to continue to see demand taper off. Though we haven't seen a dramatic decline in demand, we've just seen so much more inventory than what we're used to. So that same kind of level of demand is spread out over many more choices, many more homes out there. But we've actually been solidly in that 500 to 600 overall pending range all the way through summer, through all of the turmoil and volatility with rising interest rates. So that's kind of pretty interesting to see that we haven't seen demand really come down. Now, with that, in the summertime, we normally see kind of inventory rise and demand level off and a small uptick in the fall. That's kind of our general seasonal cycle in our area. And that exception is one, interest rates rising, but also this being an election year. I've talked about this briefly before, but typically it's presidential election years when our housing market kind of takes a break as people get distracted and focused on that major geopolitical events, and then goes back to buying and selling homes and back to their daily lives in a move after that takes place. So generally that's presidential election. But this year, even though it's midterms, because politics have been so contentious over the past couple years, I am expecting people to kind of focus and give that same attention, well, maybe not quite the same amount of attention, but very close to the same amount of attention that you would get during a presidential election year. So I'm estimating that the housing market is going to continue to be slow for this fall, even though we typically see a small uptick in both pending and just general activity sales in the fall. But we've seen that kind of dampen and likely will continue to dampen through the rest of the year. It'll be really interesting to see how that plays out because interest rates right now are 6.7% for the 30-year fixed, according to Freddie Mac, which is the first time they've been that high since 2007. And we're up almost half a percentage point in just 1 week. So last week we were at like 6.25. Now we're almost 6.75 for the average 30-year fixed. Now, with that being said, your interest rate with your lender is going to be different than the national average. That's just the national average right now, but it depends on, of course, your credit worthiness and the lender that you're working with and all of that stuff. And if you are a buyer, it is so important to shop around and talk to different lenders right now because different lenders are offering different things and everything isn't always about the rate that you get because there are other fees and costs and things that matter as well. And most importantly, the lender's reputation in the local market that you're buying in also matters a great deal because if your lender has a reputation of not closing deals and not getting homes sold, not getting it to the finish line, then you're probably not going to have really great success getting to that finish line with them. And you might want to talk to your real estate professional about maybe somebody that they recommend that they've worked with a few times that knows really how Idaho contracts work and things like that. That's why it's so important to get somebody local. Now, as a buyer, right now is a fantastic time if you can afford it because you're dealing with way less competition than what we've seen over the past couple of years. Not only that, sellers are still asking for that pie in the sky price on a lot of homes. So you're seeing homes sit on the market and have price reduction after price reduction after price reduction. And especially for those homes that started, 100,000 more than what they're really worth, is you're seeing people getting less than what their final asking price is, as well as maybe having to pay for some closing costs. Maybe they have to do or credit for inspection repair items. Maybe they're going to buy down the buyer's interest rate with a credit. Lots of things can be done to benefit the buyer right now. And buyers are getting a way more fair deal than what we've seen over the past couple of years right now, comparatively. Now, it's still technically considered a seller's market. We're on the high end of a seller's market, headed toward a balanced market. I'll talk more about that next week when we go into the market dynamics, because that will actually show us the true absorption rate of what's going on. But based on what I'm seeing is we're still headed toward that balanced market, not a buyer's market yet, but toward a balanced market. I wouldn't be surprised if we were in that territory within the next 6 months. But with this fall and the activity that we're seeing out there, if interest rates continue to rise, we will finally start to see prices come down. But prices, they've flattened over the summertime and really started to find their new normal and stabilize, which is great. But we're also, because of that more competition and rising interest rates and diminishing affordability, we are finally starting to see prices come down a bit. And if they continue to rise, prices will come down further. Now, as a buyer, waiting for a price to come down and interest rates to be higher depends on your situation, but in most cases is probably not going to be worth it if you're just simply waiting for prices to come down, because you're going to be paying more in interest on your monthly payment. So it might be a wash overall. I know I talked to somebody earlier this summer that was looking at, I think it was a $600,000 house, and interest rates then were about 5%. And they're like, oh, I'm going to wait for the price to drop. It didn't drop. It did end up going pending and selling. But we were talking about, well, if rates go up like they say they're going to, and we get from 5% up to 6%, which they say is likely to happen, you would need the price to come down by more than $50,000 in order to have the exact same monthly mortgage payment. $50,000 less in purchase price would need to drop because of where interest rates would be. And obviously that didn't end up happening. They didn't end up buying that one. But that's kind of a lesson on how interest rates really have a huge impact on the affordability. So if you're waiting for prices to drop, but you're going to be paying higher interest, you might not see prices come down enough to make up for that interest payment. It depends on your specific situation, so please feel free to reach out to me or a realtor that you trust to actually talk about the specifics with your situation, because that blanket statement is kind of hard to contextualize for you specifically. So it's very important that you talk to somebody that you trust and go over your specific individual wants, needs, goals, and how your situation may play out. And the market that you're in too. Depends on, even on our local market, we have micro markets, like Eagle operates differently than Boise, Meridian operates differently than Cuna, like stuff like that. So make sure that you go into this informed. And as a buyer, it's never too early to start thinking about what you need to do and get your ducks in a row, because you still want to be able to move quickly, especially if you can find a lender that's going to be able to lock your interest rate. Especially if you can find a lender that can lock your interest rate prior to you getting an offer accepted, so that you can keep that lower interest rate as they continue to increase. So you can shop around with that same interest rate as homes come on the market. So that's something to consider. If you need help with that, reach out to me. I have people that are able to do that, which is awesome. And then on the seller side, it's still super important to price your house correctly. In fact, if you're looking at comparable sales, say your neighbor sold for, I don't know, $550 or $50,000 over asking. That's what I meant to say. You're probably not going to get that same $50,000 over asking, especially if that's the only sale that had that, $50,000 over in the last few months. So you're likely going to be looking at that being the most that you can probably get, unless your house is like 100 times better or what have you, because obviously different homes are in different condition. But realistically, when you're looking at that comparable sales window and you're like, okay, well, the sales are kind of taking place between 500 and 525, you probably want to be closer to that 500 number on your asking price rather than the 525, because otherwise you're going to end up sitting there on the market and then probably end up reducing from 525 to 500 and maybe get less ultimately, because that's what we're seeing in the market over and over and over. I've been seeing it all summer, but especially right now with just price reduction after price reduction after price reduction, because people are asking way too much, and that's just the reality of the market. However, as a seller, it's not normal for a house to sell in one weekend anymore. That's just not the case by and large. So if your home is still on the market for a month, that's probably okay, because our average days on market is increasing, and that used to be typical prior to the pandemic. Our average days on market was like 40 back in 2015, and that was the last time we had this amount of available homes. Prior to the pandemic, our average days on market was like 25, 26, under 30, but around a month. So that's kind of where we're headed again, is around that month, maybe more, because our inventory is much higher than what we saw prior to the pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see how that works, but don't freak out if your house doesn't sell in 1 week. And as a buyer, if you're looking at homes and they've been on the market for 2 weeks, that doesn't mean anything's wrong with it. It's just the market that we're in now. That's kind of what I have for you this week. So next week, we're going to go into that deep dive. I did want to give you kind of those tidbits. If you're thinking about buying or selling, even in the next 6 months, you're planning on spring, now's a great time to meet with somebody, because I'm meeting with people right now that are getting things ready to go and starting that process so that they can kind of come up with a plan and move at their own pace rather than scramble at the last minute next year, because, well, some people like to scramble. I like to plan if possible, but most people end up scrambling, right? So we'll see you next week for the deep dive. I hope everyone has a great weekend, and take care. Stay tuned for the next week's segment of Market Watch.